Hello and welcome to Horticultural Diplomacy, a community science and justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion demonstration garden project. I'm Michael Washburn, Preservation Director at Seed Savers Exchange, and I'll be your host for this session. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our community agreements. I'll put them on the screen for everybody. So we ask that all participants in growing together, sharing seeds, stories, and skills, be respectful, be curious, be patient, speak from your own experiences, try to avoid jargon, be conscious of intent versus impact, take space, make space, and take care of self. A special thanks to United Foods Incorporated for sponsoring this session. And today we are here with Stephen Stresow. Now, Stephen began gardening as a middle schooler in El Paso, Texas, in the heart of the Chihuahuan Desert. He is currently a first-year PhD student in the Hayden Lab at Michigan State University, researching how the timing of multiple organic fertilizers impact their nutrient availability. Stephen Stresow hopes that this research will provide insight into reducing nutrient runoff and give farmers more tools to manage their soil fertility. Prior to this, he earned his bachelor's and master's degree in horticulture from Cornell University, where he worked in plant pathology and organic vegetable production. Today, Stephen will be talking about how beyond growing food, gardens can be used to build community and address social issues. This session highlights a statewide vegetable trial garden program that used a horticultural diplomacy framework to introduce master gardener volunteers to diverse crops and cultures relevant to Latin America and East Asia. Including relevant recipes and bed groupings help participants build garden skills, contribute to an online database of well-performing varieties across climates, and gain a greater appreciation for other cultures. He outlines steps that made this new iteration successful and notes areas for improvement. Stephen, thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I hope you're having a fantastic day, whether you're just joining this conference or you've seen other presentations today. And thank you, Matthew, for that great introduction. So yes, I'm going to talk about a program we worked on last year that's still ongoing. Well, it started in 2022, and last year was my first year being involved with it. And yeah, let's get started. So before I continue, I do want to give a land acknowledgement. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayacono, also known as the Cayuga Nation. The Gayacono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of the Gayacono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of the Gayacono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. It's not a part of the official Cornell land acknowledgement, but the American and Indigenous Studies professors and department also likes to point out the fact that Cornell University and other land-grant institutions were founded on stolen land under the Moore Act of 1862. And, more than just like starting off from a land acknowledgement, we kind of like to say, like, well, why is this important, right? This conference, or this day of the conference, is centered around building community. And, that's what this project likes to do. And we would be remiss if we didn't recognize where we are coming from and trying to build better relationships, especially, when it comes to food sovereignty, biodiversity conservation. Indigenous peoples make up a small percentage of the global population, yet are the ones, responsible for managing, I think it's about like 80% of global biodiversity, and, through non-extractive production means. And there's a lot, we can learn from them. And then moving on, right, Matthew gave a great introduction, but a little bit about me. I'm from El Paso, Texas, which, one of the things I'm really passionate about, not necessarily professionally, but everyone says, you grow. Why are you from the desert and you like plants? There's nothing there, and nothing could be further from the truth. It is a fantastic place, to study plants. We don't have as many trees, which is a bummer, but it's absolutely wonderful. I really got involved with Master Gardeners and Master Naturalists and other outreach presentations, and I think kind of come full circle today. I remember frequently buying Seed Savers Exchange seeds and planting them in my garden, and now I get to talk to y'all. So that's really cool. And beyond my kind of like PhD dissertation research of nitrogen dynamics, I'm really interested in plants because I kind of approach it as plants are great, but plants are food, and food is a way for us to share culture and values and a little bit about who we are. And when I'm not in the field or in the lab, I love bird watching, running, hiking, foraging, and a newfound passion in grad school has been fermenting, whether that is yogurt, kombucha, or mead. So enough about me. What about the vegetable varieties trial garden? So this is what the bulk of the presentation is going to be about. So what is a trial garden? A trial garden, for all intents and purposes, is a garden where you are trialing out specific fruits and vegetables to see how they perform. And Cornell, as the extension arm for New York State, has been managing these like trial gardens in about half the New York counties for a little over the past decade. So every year we have about 100 participants, and county participation varies. But what's unique about this is that each of these counties or Master Gardener chapters get the same plants. And since Master Gardeners are trained volunteers, they have access to a little bit of extension resources and gardening. It's this idea that it's going to be somewhat replicated. And each summer, the crops they get are chosen by cooperative extension team members, educators, faculty, and in collaboration with Master Gardeners and other community partners. And they're all centered around a theme, right? So in the past, it's been container gardens, which during the pandemic was kind of a way we used community science to figure out what varieties people can grow on their patios and balconies. Beneficial insects, because there's a lot of interest in colony apsitor and pollinator decline. Vegetable families as a teaching tool. And what's really great about this is that the gardeners participating in this program, and really any gardener across the country, can submit varieties to this website, Vegetable Varieties for Gardeners. There's a link at the end of the presentation. And what's really cool about it is, you see on the bottom, gardeners can say, what was the overall growing experience, how it tasted, the yield, and how easy it was to grow. So just like anything someone might buy online, seeing these reviews, it's one thing for someone to say, oh, this is the best tomato in the universe, and then you have a bunch of people who grow it and say the same thing. It's really nice, or maybe rotten tomatoes. I don't know what the pun connection is there, but I just thought of that. Right, and yeah, so it's a really way to use like community science to get data on all these varieties and to see what people are growing, how it's performing. And I think it's really nice, when you think of New York just being like a large state, what about a tomato that performs really well? I'm from Texas, right? What grows in Texas is very different when what might grow well in New York, and that's in its cold climate, zone 3 versus zone 7, for example. So being able to have comments by real people is really fantastic. But extension and the Cornell Garden-Based Learning Program is, we want to help people garden better. We want to provide education, and then COVID happened, and we're a gardening organization. That's what we do. But there's all these global events, happening. One of the effects of the pandemic is millions of people started gardening. Not sure how many people stuck with it, but and then we think about climate change. I feel like every year is the hottest year on record. And that caused lots of climate refugees and migration, or even just when we think about migrations, people moving from say an area that might be flooding, or to escape wildfires to another place across the country, or for school. I know I moved from Texas to New York, and now I'm in Michigan, and those are 3 very different climates. And part of COVID, there's also a lot of like xenophobia. So we were thinking to ourselves, like, what do we do as a gardening organization, right? What small role can we play in addressing, these really big societal issues? And that's where we came up with the idea of using the trial gardens. So there's some research that says, the fastest way to win the heart of a nation is through food. So we thought of this as winning the hearts and minds of people through gardening, which plays on this idea of, food and food diplomacy, because, what a lot of times what people are growing in gardens is food that you eat. And, this has like a really long basis. I think as long as humanity has existed, and honestly, I can definitely see, this in animal and, other plants. Food is the oldest form of diplomacy, right? It is a way to breaking bread with people is a way to show that you care about them. And it's almost like a universal experience, right? Everyone is familiar with someone, perhaps like feeling down and, somebody taking you to go to ice cream or, baking you a cake, right? There's a lot of celebrations around food. And, because we're already using the master gardeners as educators, right? These gardens host 4-H groups, school groups, FFA, just they're open for the community members to go and see. Well, like, how can we take advantage of the master gardeners' role as educators and their contact with the public and, maybe work towards, addressing some of these larger social issues? So it's built on, these three kind of like frameworks from, the humanities. One is the contact hypothesis. And what that means is that, if you have two groups who might disagree with each other for whatever reason, and you put them together, in a controlled environment, right? There's maybe moderators, there's mediators, it's non-confrontational. If you think of, two rival fans at a football game, right? That's not the environment you want them to be engaging in where tensions are high. Where you take those two people and, you have them at your tailgate or, have them out for dinner, right? That's a very different interaction. And, once people can get beyond their differences and see the humanity in one another, they're much more likely to engage, right? And it's a thing that is been coined as culinary or like gastro diplomacy. And so what that does is like the medium for building relationships with one another comes through food, right? And the thing that I like about gastro diplomacy is that it's built on the idea that an individual person, and at any time you share food, you can use that as quote unquote a contact zone, right? You're coming into contact with another person, and it could be as complicated and as ornate as, say, a visiting head of state, goes to another country, and that country, brings out, all of their cultural dishes and food and parades and shows, and, you really highlights, their culture in that event. But it's also as simple as, inviting someone over for dinner and showing them, oh, this is, my grandparents are Mexican, my parents are Mexican, grew up on the border, right? So whenever I make pozole or enchiladas or tacos to someone, I could say like, oh yeah, this is what I grew up eating as a kid. And the goal is not to, tell the history of tacos and pozole and Mexican cuisine. Although I'm happy to talk about the domestication of corn if anybody's interested. And a lot of my dinner guests, unfortunately, do have to hear me talk about that, right? But the idea is you're coming to engage with other people using food as a medium. So it's a really powerful way to introduce these conversations to others through a medium, because who's going to be upset if you're giving them free food, right? So what did that look like, right? So we, to implement this, we kind of got away from just the botanical traits of these trial gardens, and we decided moving forward we're going to focus on varieties that are important from different regions around the world. And this sort of serves like two purposes. One is, well, how do these varieties perform in New York State? We don't have a lot of data. We're not conducting research on some of these varieties or some of these crops. And sometimes in the summer it's hot. Maybe they perform well. Maybe they need longer growing seasons. And if we think about our role as to serve diverse populations, as many gardeners as possible, well, if we're not going to be doing research on this, how are we going to get this information? So we thought using master gardeners is a great way to learn more about these crops. And this is a small selection of it, but we decided the first year we're going to do cultural roots of the Americas. So this comes from crops from Latin America, the Caribbean, South America, and just like North America. And it's really cool because then as we talk about, well, why did we select these crops and where do these crops come from? We have an opening to talk about the history of where these plants from. I can't see all on the internet, but I know a lot of people I talk to, you know, they're shocked to learn that potatoes, you know, originated in Peru, and there's thousands of potato varieties in Peru, you know, because everyone associates them, you know, with the Irish potato famine. And then, you know, it's an avenue through plants to talk about some of these historical events and the contributions, you know, people around the world have made, you know, to agriculture. Or even the idea of purple potatoes, right? And how some varieties that, you know, we didn't know existed or might not know exist are there. Same thing with some of these pepper varieties, you know, these nice like UFO shaped things, and even herbs, cilantro, epazote, or like amaranth. And, you know, how these crops are really delicious, but people might not know they exist. Right? And this really differs from like past themes, right? You know, big yields in small spaces. You know, these are all photos I've taken, you know, walking around, you know, somebody gardening in an ice chest, right? Knowing what's going to grow in that ice chest is fantastic, but that tends to be a botanical trait, you know, determined by genetics and, you know, being bred for small spaces. Or vegetable families, right? It's really educational. I think it's really cool how, you know, so many of the brassica crops we eat come from, you know, the wild mustard plant. You know, the flower buds, the stems, you know, the leaves, you know, vegetables are just, you know, a part of a plant that we eat. Yeah, so shifting away from this, you know, also has the benefit of allowing us to use community science as in situ conservation. So like, what does that mean, right? Well, when we think about these varieties, they exist, and if we want them to exist and do well in New York State or wherever, you know, they need to be grown, right? So we have that community outreach component through the master gardeners, through people visiting. We have data collection, right? So beyond just, you know, we grew this in New York. Well, how did it grow? How much did it yield? How big did it go? How was there a lot of pest pressure? Which pests were on it? Was there a lot of disease pressure? Was it resistant to, you know, to the other diseases that happened, you know, to cure our crops? So just growing these in a slightly more like intentional way and having, you know, volunteers dedicated to collecting data on it, you know, is really valuable. And, you know, and then that also goes into, I feel like if you grow something, and if you're on this conference, I'm assuming that your gardeners are friends with the gardeners, right? One of the best parts of gardening is eating what you grew. So, you know, so having tasting events where gardeners come together and evaluate these crops, right, that they may not have otherwise tried. And then that goes to the, you know, back to the sharing the results online and making this information, you know, available free for the public. You know, I really like this quote, you know, talking about how these, I believe it was a pumpkin, you know, performed really well in zone 3, which is, you know, I think the Adirondacks area, really, you know, really, really cold. I went ice climbing there one time, and, you know, growing zone 3 is always less than optimal. And, you know, so we have, you know, gardeners say that, you know, these things perform well. It's kind of, you know, a little bit of validity to what they're saying, right? And this is different, you know, in situ conservation is different than what's called ex situ conservation, right? So if our goal was just focused on the botanical aspect, you know, we could put these seeds in, you know, in Norway and other germplasm banks. And that's, you know, they serve a role and a function, you know, for preserving seeds, you know, in case of, you know, nuclear winter, and are really great, and they serve a lot of purposes, but not necessarily that, you know, community building event that we want to tackle. So, right, how do we succeed in these, right? So kind of, you know, I talked about, you know, the social science stuff, and now I promise I will talk about plants a little bit. Right, I think everyone has seen tomatoes and peppers and onions. I hope all of you have had salsa. Absolutely delicious. I know some people even argue that salsa can be considered a salad, because you think of salad as just like a blend of vegetables. What is salsa? Right. But when we think about, you know, some gardeners who may not, you know, who might experience, you know, tomatoes, onions, and peppers, but maybe not these varieties, right? If you see in the corner of the screen, you know, these UFO looking Mad Hatter peppers, you might look at that and it's like, well, what do I do with this? How do I use this? Yeah, so it's combining food, teaching, and gardening in one plot. When, you know, when we have, you know, group these plants in beds that can grow together. Well, we have peppers and tomatoes, which together we could talk about, you know, plant families and disease. You know, you have bunching onions, kind of on the border to fill up space where these plants fill out. And then what happens when you put the 3 of these together? You get salsa. So we get to have, you know, talk to people about, you know, the salsa beds. So now you learn about some, you know, not all of the ingredients in salsa, and now you've seen them like growing together. Then you have a frame of reference. So you see these peppers, and if you, for whatever reason, you can't think of anything else to use them for, at least you have salsa, which I think is really exciting. Right? And back to public outreach event, right? This is a quote from one of the gardeners who was saying at a public outreach event, very few of their attendees had ever had collards. And if you're going to a garden outreach, kind of like potluck, you probably eat a lot of vegetables and stuff. So this is a way to, one, we're already introducing people to new vegetables. And the idea of this project is, can we take it a step further? And when we talk about collards, talk about, the cultural history and the significance, behind collards. So could we link them to the Cornell Botanical Garden, for example, had this presentation exhibit called Seeds of Survival, where they really went into foods of the Black diaspora. Can we share those resources with them, and provide this tasting event as a way to have food and a little bit of learning about other people, right? And this, I think, is one of my favorite examples, right? We use gardens and crops for more than just food. In fact, the word companion comes from Latin for compan, which means the person one shares the bed with. And marigolds are fantastic. A lot of gardeners, myself included, will grow marigolds, to attract beneficials. Some people say, they repel insects. Companion planting is a thing that a lot of gardeners are familiar with. So part of the idea of the horticulture diplomacy framework is you take something that gardeners are familiar with. For example, marigolds, right? Gardener is going to be upset, if someone says, "Oh, we're going to grow marigolds." But like many plant families, right, there's so many varieties, so many cultivars of plants that are out there. So instead of growing, traditional marigold that you might see at the garden center, we're like, well, what if we do the Mexican mint marigold? It's native to the Southwest and other parts of Mexico. So one, we learn, well, how does it perform in New York? Two, we introduce people to a new crop. And three, this crop is important to a lot of people. And so it's one thing to say that, oh, this crop is really nice. But then part of our educational outreach, is showing that, well, yeah, people are using this crop. This is a Day of the Dead, or Dia de los Muertos altar, that one of my friends had in her apartment in Ithaca. I had friends from like New York City send me pictures of theirs. And we were using marigolds, and you could see some of the more yellow ones of like Mexican mint marigold as a cultural celebration to honor ancestors and those who have passed away, or loved ones who have passed away. And it's also cooking. It's can be used as a French tarragon substitute. Kind of has this like minty taste to it, which is why it's called Mexican mint marigold. So by growing a just type of marigold, which seems like a very simple swap in a garden, you open the avenue to learning, all these things, and you still accomplish all of your gardening, all your botanicals, attracts beneficials, all that stuff. But now, you have a link to other cultural aspects. And this is a thing that I also think is really exciting. It kind of goes to why do we do this work? And I know it's Friday night, so I won't make you, answer this, but just take a second and think about, these two plants, and are you able to identify them? Right? Okay. They're both green. They both kind of have seed heads. But they're two completely different plants. The one on the left is lamb's quarters, Chenopodium album, and a lot of people call it a weed. And depending on how much of it there it is, it definitely can be. And the other one is epazote. It's one of those Latin American herbs that we grew as part of this trial. And they're the same plant family. Oh, used to be in the same. They're in the same family. Used to even have the same genus. They look really, really similar to one another. And what happened was one of the gardeners who had never seen epazote before accidentally weeded it all out. And that happens. not as frequently. You think, master gardener, trained gardeners, trained volunteers. But, sometimes it happens, and it kind of just goes to show, one, it's important, that we keep growing these things so we could use that. We think about extension and wanting to be able to, share educational resources with gardeners. We can tell them, hey, watch out for this. We can also say, hey, it takes a lot of time for it to germinate, so don't pull it up. And then, well, okay, we accidentally weeded our crop. What do we do? It opens up the avenue to teach about things. I see someone in the chat saying lamb quarters is delicious. Yes, that was right my point. We're going to say, I know you're here to garden and, grow these crops that are cultivated, but what if we eat some weeds? Or what if we think about eating weeds? Some of my other work is on how vegetables are a social construct and how, we should really be thinking about eads and imagining what we call a fruit versus a vegetable. But yeah, so it's another educational opportunity that definitely would have happened. And then what does the public think, right? I talk a lot about, this is great, gardens are learning so much. But what about somebody, walking into the gardens, right? And I think, a demonstration garden is meant to demonstrate good gardening practices and, knowledge and resources, right? But by showing these culturally relevant, apologies for that, by showcasing these culturally relevant varieties and, some of the information about where they come from and having links to recipes and other information, right? We're also demonstrating that everyone belongs in a garden, that these gardens are meant for everyone, that we really appreciate other people's contributions. And, some gardeners who came into the garden said, they really appreciate it. And it's a great conversation starter because, one, people are curious, like, what's that plant, right? It's very simple. And then other people have said, they really appreciate seeing plants that they grew up with, herbs, varieties that they grew up with, present in this garden so far from home. Right. So of course we're a county extension program. So we want to see, was this effective, right? Because we could talk a lot about this, but did it really do anything? So we surveyed the gardeners, and actually about half of them responded, which is really nice. On a scale from 1 to 10, 5 is like, yes, I agree, this is amazing. 1 is, this was horrible. So kind of on a baseline, they really learned a lot about, new techniques and new crops, which is really cool. And we asked them, well, what did you think? Was it an effective teaching tool to introduce you to new varieties and cultures, right? Because, the goal is not to say replace a DEI training or saying that, the gardeners are going to grow new crops and then automatically become the best version of themselves. No, those types of work definitely have a value. But it's this is a way to, not spoon feed, but a slight non-confrontational introduction, kind of pun intended, plant the seed of cultural awareness and diversity into these gardeners, right? So we tried to sow it. Did we reap it? Right. I think most of the gardeners said they were really mindful to be more welcoming, make an effort, try to acknowledge other cultures, right? And, this is a way to talk about why cultures are important, and then we can supplement this, with additional training, include more things about culture sensitivity in different garden development programs and stuff. But one thing I liked was, being more open to seeking out experiences from other cultures. And we talked to them about that. It's well, what does that mean? What does an experience from another culture mean, right? We're not saying okay, now I'm going to go to Peru to see the homeland of the potatoes. Although if anyone wants to fund me, I'm happy to go, and I'll take plenty of pictures for you. But it means, okay, maybe, thinking back to that salsa bed, right? If someone's never had Mexican food, saying, oh, wow, this is really good. I grew it myself. Now I want to go, someplace else. Maybe I never would have thought of going to a Mexican restaurant. I know that's a very simple example, but that's kind of the ideas, can we increase openness? Because, the first step to building cross-cultural, almost any relationship, is being open to it. And that's really what we're trying to achieve, is this being open. Right. And so, okay, so what about gardening skills, right? So that's great that people are more open, to these programs, but did they actually learn anything? Because if, we don't want to be changing the program too much and then lose out on that aspect. And gardeners did, they felt that it improved their community science abilities, having to, go and like rate these varieties and post them online and do these taste tests, help them live, become, better home scientists, which is really nice. And also one thing is, now they know where they can find, they know about companies like Seed Savers Exchange who, shout out to them, have donated seeds to us in the past. And other companies where, you can find source culturally relevant seeds, or even know like, oh, this is a thing to look for, and be able to share this information with others, because we really rely on them on that. Right. And what else happened with some of this gardening things? One of the things that's really nice is that we were able to make like a seed catalog of all the varieties that have been posted on this website for the past, 20 years, almost longer than I've been alive. Right. And we also got to really showcase these culturally important varieties and what they mean, and kind of like go expand on the history of Day of the Dead, for example, with these marigolds, what we are trying to accomplish. And, educational materials like this that live, almost in perpetuity on Cornell's websites. And, we have documents of, it's a way to get the message out, that there's more than just lettuce and tomatoes that we think of. Right. So this is just, I put a lot of work into this, so I'm, kind of plugging the catalog. Right. But, we could talk about things, right? Remember, we think of this as being an open introduction, right? One example is the kestrel beet. So we talk about, beet dyes, but we also talk about the American kestrel, because it sounds the same. And introduce people to research and people using kestrels to manage, birds in their fruit orchards, and this non-spray wet method of pest control, right? So what are we doing in the future? We've had 2 great seasons, about to do our 3rd one. We had the African, culture roots of the Americas. This past summer was East Asia. Upcoming is to be the African diaspora. And so what do we want to do? Well, one, we want to recruit more diverse master gardeners. We love our volunteers. They're wonderful. They're fantastic. Any master gardening organization is where I start. But it would be great if the volunteer demographics really reflected, diversity in the United States. And, there's a lot that goes into it, time commitment, being a volunteer. But still, that is our goal. And, part of that goal is making them feel welcome at their perspectives, that other perspectives are valued and they belong. Right. And part of that goes into expanding the educational component, right? We, spent the first couple of seasons just trying to, make sure, does this work, right? Can we have a little bit of information on these science? And now, some more funding and some more time in this, it's like, now maybe let's expand the information. Let's expand the trainings and the information we give to gardeners, and create more resources around how to grow these things. And I'll just, finish this off is, why is stuff like this needed, right? And this isn't just our specific variety project. This is all community science projects, all participatory science projects. This is a map of New York State, and all these little red lines are the various agriculture research stations across the state. And they do great work. Most of my jobs have been on agriculture research stations, and they provide a lot of information. But they're not going to be able to quite capture the diversity and across, the entire state. But having gardeners across the entire state is really, really fantastic. And I'll just leave this on this last note, right? You might have heard why am I saying community science and not citizen science? There's a lot of citizen science projects out there. It's kind of, the common term for it. Things like iNaturalist or eBird. But we really wanted to focus that this is community science, because even though we're using individuals, we want to build, community. That's what this project wants to do, even though it's data collection. And also, anyone can do it. We don't want to turn away or be using citizen programming, because, extension is in that, interesting place where it's funded by the government, but it's not like a government agency, and it's definitely not, like a regulatory agency of any kind. And we don't want to be saying, it's only open to citizens, open. We just want to reiterate, like gardening is open to everyone. And so like our programs. And with that, thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I'm happy to stay on to take any questions. Feel free to follow up with me via email if there's anything that you're interested in. And then these 2 links and QR codes, one of them is the Cornell Garden-Based Learning website, which is where, we host, kind of like blogs and garden resources. That catalog I mentioned will be there. And then the Virtual Varieties for Gardeners website is where you'll see all of like the gardener reviews of different varieties in the trial gardens.
Stephen, that was awesome. That was fantastic. Yeah, as a anthropology guy myself, of course, you hit my heart on the just sit at the table with everybody. Personally, for a takeaway for me, as like, it doesn't matter what differences you may have, if you can just get to the table together, you'll find out the commonalities of humanity that we share. And I appreciate you really bringing in on a plate. I think the curiosity, we're lucky to have so many different cultural offerings, especially if you're in some of the cities that just create curiosity. And if you can sit down to a dish that's unfamiliar as a gardener, it does make you curious of, hey, what is in that? So I appreciate the social connections that you've put together there. I've got a question here. This one comes from Joanne. It says, "What have been the most surprising plants in your garden to the people who tried it for the first time?"
Ooh, that is a good question. I think it's definitely going to be either epazote or uketai. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I think I have a picture of it right here. It's one of these like Latin American, I believe Caribbean herbs that a lot of people had never really tried before. And it's just kind of like big and monstrous in the garden. Really takes over. But I mean, it has this like, it's hard to describe. It's like almost this like very umami, cilantro like flavor. So in addition to like not knowing the herb, then even the name of it, I think this or the purple potatoes. I think everyone is always amazed when you take varieties of crops. There's beans, there's peas, there's tomatillos, there's peppers, there's carrots, there's potatoes, definitely other things like cauliflower. And you show it in purple or blue or even blue corn, right? The fact that something we never think of like that. So that's a long answer, but anything colorful, I guess, is what final answer will be.
And then Spencer's asking, "Do you have any experience helping different immigrant populations find their cultural foods here, or have encouraged farmers to grow something for those populations?"
That is a great question. I'm actually, in Lansing, doing a little bit more work with that, with the Greater Lansing Food Bank. They have specific community garden projects, and they just hired like a immigrant immigrant gardener specialist, to kind of like work one-on-one with these communities, to kind of answer those questions and come up with like best practices. Some farmers are definitely growing, especially farmers working, with not saying that all immigrants rely on food banks, but sometimes it could be a really when you think about like vulnerable populations, right? Immigrating to the United States can be, new language, new culture, all this stuff. So I've seen growers and gardeners work more directly with food banks to try and serve these populations, or perhaps maybe like a smaller, like Asian. Because we have a Korean grocery store down the street, grocery store to try and supply these varieties. What I suggest to a farmer, hey, do this for a farmer's market and stuff. I don't have the economic expertise to do that, but I know some growers who know like the demographics of where they grow are definitely doing that. And for finding resources here, right? I think I don't know which company told us, but one of the things is like just keep growing these varieties, because it shows seed companies that there's a demand for it. And it's just sometimes you just have to be creative finding seed companies. But if I come up with anything new, I will definitely let y'all know.
Great. Yeah, we had a speaker earlier talking about the availability of certain herbs, cultural herbs, and we find that as well. Just even the availability of being able to find some of these seeds to grow the foods of a particular culture. And if you get a hold of Seed Savers, we do have a lot in the seed bank that lots of times we can find have seeds that do fit a lot of cultures from around the world for that availability. But Stephen, we could go on, but we have had our time. We've got wonderful words all on the board for you here. And we just really appreciate your time here. Steve, it's great getting to know you. And yeah, I've always been interested in desert growing. I'm from Texas, but I was on the north end, so a little bit different there. So, but again, just want to give you a special thanks for this just wonderful presentation. Thank you to our audience for this day, for joining us all here. A big thanks to United Natural Foods Incorporated for sponsoring this presentation and this wonderful day of presenters. And this is our last presentation of the day. Please join us on June 7th for the second of 4 sessions in our summer conference. So if you're already with us today, you are already registered for the next 3 conference dates. So again, Stephen, thank you so much. And folks, we'll see y'all then. Take care.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.